Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 69. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very special guest up in Canada, Brandon Farewell. Brandon, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, Joe. I'm doing real good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really, really well. We both have mustaches, so people listening to this podcast will not be able to see either of us, just audio for now. But for the record, your mustache is about 100 times better than my mustache, and I'm very jealous.
You got to commit to the full year.
The full year. So have you been growing that out for an entire year?
It's been a couple months. I would say it gets to about 5 months, and then you got to sort of trim it a little bit.
Okay, so I've got 4.5 more months until I got to trim this bad boy. We'll see where it takes me.
Yeah, let's do it.
But for now, we connected through social media, and I just came across some of your content, and it was a combination of the aesthetic of it, how consistent it was, and then the messaging really just resonated with me. And so I felt like I had to reach out, and here we are. And so to get started, why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brandon Farewell. I was born and raised on the east coast of Canada, in Newfoundland, if anybody knows where that is. It's so far east that we have a 30-minute time zone. So we're as east as it gets in North America.
You have a 30-minute time. Wait, what time is it by you?
It's 7:35.
I did not know that existed. I'll be
Yeah,
completely honest.
it's pretty crazy.
Does that make it hard to schedule things with other time zones?
I have to bring it up every single time, and people don't believe me when I first say it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so I learned something new. So what do you do full time for work, Brandon?
Yeah, so right now I'm doing a mix of fitness coaching and videography. I'm just freelance right now online. Transitioned from engineering last year. So I finished engineering in 2019. I was fortunate enough that in my engineering program, we're actually required to do internships. So before I even graduated, I had a really good idea of what it was going to be like working in the real world as an engineer. And so I knew about halfway through my degree that this wasn't really what I thought it was. And I found that because I've had multiple internships in different industries and with different, work environments and in different locations in the world, I realized that there wasn't really going to be an engineering job out there that was going to really make me happy with what I was doing. I wasn't interested in it. And yeah, I mean, that's basically it, really. I wasn't interested in a way that I seen others were. And so about halfway through the degree, I was sort of lost and wasn't sure where I was going to take things afterwards. And because of that, I did start working as an engineer as soon as I graduated, because I figured it was better to make money than to sit around and not really know what I was doing at all. And fortunately, entrepreneurship became super trendy around then, and being freelance just to have flexibility and stuff. So I realized, okay, I love fitness. So I'm going to do something with fitness, and I don't want to go back to school and perhaps commit another 4 or 5 years and find out that I don't like that thing. So I asked myself, what is a non-education version of doing something with fitness? And so fitness coaching came to mind. A lot of people have had incredible success with it. So I basically tried to copy exactly what they did, and it turned out pretty well. And that's sort of the beginning of how I got into making these videos, funny enough. but we can get into that when we talk specifically about them. But yeah, just from there, I got into fitness coaching, started coaching people online. I still have clients left over now, but I'm in the process of offboarding those clients once their programs are over so that I can focus fully on videography work.
Got it. Got it. So I think there's a really important lesson embedded there, which was you realized you didn't want to continue on the path that you had invested into. And so instead of completely jumping ship and investing a ton of more time and resources into something else that you weren't sure if you would fall in love with, you decided to just take a small, very actionable step in that direction. You used other people's current experiences as a template, and you said, if it's working for them, let me try to make it work for myself. And it did. And then it took you to this place now where you are no longer actively pursuing that. And it just brought you to this next level where now you are going to branch off and pursue something else with your full force, which I think a lot of people are afraid to do. They're afraid to pursue something that might not be a forever thing, but clearly it's worked for you. Has that always been a mindset you've embraced, or something that you've kind of had to come by as you've grown?
It was definitely a mindset that I had to grow into. You know, it wasn't one that I had. One of the biggest struggles that I had with leaving engineering, even when I thought of the whole fitness idea, was the fact that I had spent so much time achieving things with it, working really hard with it, that there were so many achievements that I was sort of leaving behind, all that hard work left behind. And not just the work, but I also realized too, one of the biggest reasons that I struggled with it was my whole identity was really built around those things. And so I was sort of starting with, you know, a fresh slate or like a, you know, a blank canvas, which can be super freeing. And honestly, it's an opportunity that I'm super grateful for nowadays whenever I have any sort of, you know, blank canvas to work with. But it can also be extremely intimidating because you're like, you know, what's the first line that I paint on this thing, right?
Yeah, I'll do this exercise with clients every now and then where I'll just ask them, "Do you want to play a game?" And they'll say, "Yeah, sure." And I'll say, "Okay, you go first." And then there's this long, awkward pause, and they're not sure what to do next. And I let it ride for a little while. And then eventually I say, it's kind of like when you have all this freedom to do whatever you want, it's really hard to get started when there are no rules and no structure, no boundaries. And I certainly felt that when I quit my full time job to start my endeavor in the coaching world full time. I felt like, okay, great. I have this blank canvas. I have all this free time in this space, but I also don't really know what the first step is. And once I took that first step, I then had more clarity on what the next step was and the next step, and it built one at a time. And it sounds like it was the same for you. So, what is it though about videography that makes you now really excited to pursue that full time?
I've always been like in love with movies in a way. That was like my favorite way of connecting with people growing up. Like I loved going to movies with my parents. I loved going to movies with my friends. I loved having like people in. Like my favorite thing was to like host my friends, throw on a good movie, have good food, have a good time. And so I was always fascinated by the movie world. And when I was really young, I was sort of artistic in a way. It wasn't great, but I was artistic, I suppose. And I thought for a while, like, oh, I'd love to do something like maybe visual effects or something like that in the whole, you know, movie industry. And as I grew older, those, you know, dreams sort of faded. Maybe because they were just a cool idea and they weren't really something I was passionate about in the first place. But regardless, as we grow older, I think we're surrounded by more, you know, quote unquote practical options, and things like that aren't often talked about, like visual effects, like graphic design, things like that. It's like, you know, these aren't mentioned. And so I never really expected to be good with videography. Like I said, I sort of picked it up to, or like I mentioned or hinted at earlier, was that the whole fitness thing was why I picked up videography. I said, these guys are making killer videos, you know, the people that I want to be like. So I need to get better at making content if I want to like compete with these guys. So that's the reason I started making the videos, or at least one of the reasons. And in making them, I realized one, how fun it was. And two, when I actually realized like how good I could get at the speed that I was getting, that I had an opportunity to sort of work with some sort of art form. I don't know, just in a very fun way. You know, I have an ability to tell stories now. And I think that excites me the most, is to be able to really like hone in on an emotion or a message and then amplify it with a visual thing like that is super exciting.
Yeah, I hear you. Actually, episode 35 of this podcast is one of my favorites. It's with my friend Danny Gewirtz, and he's big on YouTube, and he has branched out into the movie making business from kind of shorter videos on YouTube to now making movies. He helped me realize how powerful it is to tell stories in that way. And even just the 60-second videos that you're putting up on social media, sometimes shorter, they're powerful, and you never know who those are going to reach and how that's going to impact the person on the receiving end. And even if it reaches one of the many thousands of people watching those videos and it changes that person's life or their perspective, I would say it's probably worth it. And I would also imagine that you probably would feel like that's worth it. Is that accurate?
100%. And after being able to, as you make these and you share your story, which is something that a lot of people want to do, but they're very cautious of, they're very afraid of what people are going to think. But I promise you, like, as you put yourself out there, the messages that you receive from people and the response you get really shows you how impactful something like that can be. And it's really just as simple as like sharing your story. It's uniqueness. It doesn't have to be something incredible, worthy of making a documentary about, but just being open about your story. And even where you are right now, it's crazy. The response I've gotten is one that I did not expect. And now that I've gotten it, I feel a huge responsibility. And so I really take my time with every video nowadays.
Speaking of which, how long does it take you to put together, let's say, the average Instagram reel, cinematic feel, a bunch of different video clips overlaid with a nice message, captions are in sync with the audio. What does that typically take you?
So it really depends on what the video is. But for the most part, the most important part for me is finding that message first. So maybe that could take 10 minutes of just scrolling through Instagram. Or if I'm just scrolling through in general, I may, like on a day that I'm just not planning a video, I'll come across something that I really like. I'll save that audio for future use. So let's say, an average of like 10 minutes to find a worthwhile audio or message. And I'll usually screen record that or like save it so that I can upload it to my editing software. And then when I have that message, it makes it a lot easier to plan out what I'm going to film, because then I can think about things that are going to align with that message and really exaggerate like the emotion that's being put into that message. And so it probably takes me about 30 minutes worth of filming throughout the day, just setting up the camera and filming stuff that I'm sort of already doing anyways, which is the beauty of these like mini vlogs that I do, is that you're really just filming what you're doing anyway. So it's just the extra time of setting up the camera and getting the camera angles. And on top of that, it's probably 30 minutes of editing. So it's a little over an hour, but it's a bit slower when you get started. But again, like you do anything that many times in a row, it becomes really second nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things that attracted me to your page was the messaging. And it seems like you're a guy who enjoys a good quote. I'm curious if you have any good quotes that just flow off the top of the mind.
Oh man, I'd have to think about
Uh,
that.
all right, think about it. I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm a huge quote guy, and so I'm sure we'll probably exchange a few by the end of this conversation. But with that being said, let's dive into the first question. So, out of all of the things that have ever happened to you in life, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle? So, a circumstance that you didn't get to choose for yourself.
Probably dealing with like depression and anxiety and just mental health issues. And, there's many reasons why that's difficult, of course. One of the biggest being you feel very alone oftentimes. And what you need to get out of places like that is clarity and a reasonable perspective. And all of the symptoms of those battles are completely going against exactly what you need to get out of them. So you can really become, trapped, really. So that was definitely hard. And you sort of need to just inch your way out blindly and just hope it's the right direction. And again, one of the worst things about it is some people will, including myself, will do things that we think are a solution, right? We have noble intention behind it, and we actually end up hurting ourselves more. And so you need to be very self aware as you're trying to dig yourself out of that place and ask yourself whether or not what you're doing is actually making a positive difference. And if it's not, you need to consider trying something else. And obviously, I definitely recommend people getting professional help because you have that outside perspective and it gives you a little bit more clarity that you're definitely not going to have on your own.
Mm. So it reminds me of something that Jerry Ike told to me on episode 41 of the podcast. He said, ready, aim, fire. Or sorry. He said ready, fire, aim, which always throws me off. But that idea of you have to take action before you know exactly where you're aiming. And maybe you take a step to the right and you realize that you actually need to go left. Well, then that's great. You learn something, now you have to take a step to the left, or maybe you do go right and that is the right direction. You take another step that way. And so action creates clarity. But for you, when was the first time you realized that mental health was a struggle or a battle you actually had to fight?
That's a really good question. That's really good because for a long time I ignored it because we just generally think that we're unhappy because of XYZ or we're facing these symptoms because of XYZ. And so we sort of try to justify it because we don't want to take on the the label and the battle. If we can ignore the battle that's there, then we can pretend that we don't have one. And so I did that for a long time. So maybe 2 years, I really spent a lot of time just spiraling downwards, just bad habits, being in bad environments, and just generally my mental health was going down pretty quickly. And so, like I said, we have internships in engineering, and at the time, one of the biggest reasons that I was struggling with mental health was I just felt extremely lost because I didn't know what I was going to do after school. But I seen an opportunity to get a really cool internship in the States. So I was like, man, if I get this is going to be the thing that saves me. So I worked myself like to death to get the attention of recruiters and stuff. And I mean, to the point where like on Christmas Day, I was literally at school, like doing work that I didn't even need to do. And I eventually got their attention and I got an interview and I got a job. So I had an internship at Tesla Motors in California. And I thought that that was going to be like it for me. Like, okay, this is the thing. Like, I'm in California, which was my dream ever since high school, was like, I want to move and live and work in California. And I'm working for a company that, like, my God, I only dreamt of. And I thought of these things in the future. And I thought it could be, potentially happen. But I mean, the timeline I had set was ridiculously longer than what I had done because I figured, well, I'm going to get out, I'm going to work with a company, work my butt off and really establish myself as an engineer and show what I'm capable of. And eventually, job after job, I'm going to squeeze my way into something cool like that. So to be given that opportunity so much sooner than that was incredible. And I'm super grateful for it. But I'm grateful for it because it showed me that that wasn't going to help at all. And when I got down there and I was in California and I was working there doing super cool stuff, I realized that it wasn't going to change the way that I felt. And because of that, I actually felt a lot worse because it was sort of like I had the rug pulled out from underneath me. And so from there, my mental health got a lot worse very fast. And coming home from that internship, I felt a lot more lost and confused and angry and guilty and just so many regrets. All of that felt so much heavier after that internship because I realized I didn't, yeah, what's the best way of putting this? It wasn't that I thought that I couldn't achieve something. It was that I looked towards the future and I seen all the possibilities out there. And I realized that even if I could go achieve them, which I believed I could, it wasn't going to change how I felt. And so I felt extremely hopeless. And that was where I first realized that what I was dealing with wasn't just some external thing that I wanted. And it's like, oh, once I have that, then I'm going to be happy. I realized that it was actually something real. And even on top of that, when I first started dealing with anxiety, so just got like, in situations where I shouldn't have felt anxious, heart rate went crazy, sort of, breathing tight and just, almost froze up. I realized like this is very real. And because of that, that's really when I started looking into solutions for it and trying to learn more about it and trying to figure out how I may have ended up there. And more importantly, of course, how I could get out of that situation.
I would imagine there are people listening to this who were nodding their heads in agreement, following along, putting themselves in your shoes because they've either been there in the past or are there right now. And I'm sure they're wondering, as am I, okay, you realize all of this and you start looking into solutions, what do you do?
That's a good question, and it's really hard looking back to think. But one of the best things I ever did was I needed to give myself space to think, to really analyze my life. And one of the things I did, and I didn't plan on this being forever, but it is now. I quit drinking and I quit smoking weed because that was a habit that was taking up a lot of my free time, and which is not good because one, it was keeping me busy, and two, it was literally changing the way that I felt and sort of hiding the fact that I wasn't feeling good. And so, yeah, I realized that looking at my weekends, every time I had free time when I wasn't doing school and work and, all these extracurricular stuff, I was, trying to go to parties with people. And I had a great time. And I have memories from those weekends that I would never trade for the world. Like there were really great memories from that. But I realized that I need to just create some extra time where I have a little bit of clarity to actually think about how I ended up here and think about my future. Where do I want to go with it? How am I going to get there? And just that clarity alone helped me so much. Just those, extra 1 to 2 nights a week where I would have been out sort of ignoring the fact that I felt that way. The more I sat with that feeling, the more uneasy I became. And that was almost the motivation to do something. It's this feeling of uncomfortableness that pushes you forward. And on top of that, I will also say, like I did before, the professional help and speaking to a therapist gave me that outside perspective, which allowed me to find a positive direction to move in. But that uncomfortableness of sitting with that feeling was the fire that moved me in the direction that he was guiding me to.
Yeah. There's I don't even know how to phrase this. I've said this before on the podcast, so people listening have likely heard this before, but it's just too appropriate. In Colorado, it's one of the only places in the world where cows and buffalo live in close proximity. And so Colorado is generally flat, but there's a mountain range running through the middle, and that causes storms to form over the mountain range and then roll over the flat plains. And when the cows see a storm coming, they run away from it. And when the buffalo see a storm coming, they run directly into it. And as a result, because the cows are moving in the same direction as the storm, they're actually in it for a lot longer. Whereas the buffalo and the storm are moving in opposite directions. And so they're in it for a shorter period of time. And I think that there are so many parallels to life. And just what you said was, the longer that we mask things and we hide from things or we ignore things, the longer they're going to stay with us because they're not going anywhere until we face them and address them. And it's really hard to build up the courage to do that. And I can speak from personal experience. I went through a real dark time when I was in graduate school, and I built up the courage to get to a therapist. And I had that first session and I left and I felt so embarrassed and ashamed and guilty for whatever reason. It was just this image I had built in my head around the stigma of, you're weak if you go get help. And I never went back, and I regret that. I truly do. And I'm at this place in my life now where things are really good. But if I ever did need the help, I wouldn't think twice about it. And so I just don't think people can hear that message enough because there are so many people out there who are hiding from things, who are dealing with things alone when they really don't have to be. And so I appreciate you sharing that a lot. And just out of curiosity, do you still talk to a therapist today, or is that something where you used that help in the past and now you've gotten to a point where you feel okay without it?
I don't right now, but I'm the same boat as you in that if I ever felt like I needed it and I was losing that clarity that I, felt like I needed, I would 100% hop on it as soon as possible just to make sure that I got ahead of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing I'm curious about for you, because you create quite a bit of content and you're a creator. I find that when I'm creating content more than I'm consuming content, I'm generally in a better headspace. But when that balance switches and I'm consuming a lot more content than I am creating it, I tend to hit rough patches a little bit more often. Do you find the same?
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the biggest fears I had was as I was getting that clarity and moving into a healthier place in my life, I was avoiding social media so that I could get to that place. And when I thought of creating content and getting back out there and doing something like I'm doing now, I was very worried that I would become so absorbed into social media, especially if I succeeded with it and got a big following, that I would end up in a poor mental health space again. And I think, exactly what you said is true. And I definitely want to say this as well, is I'm so busy creating now that I almost never consume. And I actually have to go out of my way to search up like some of my friends on social media who, support the heck out of my content, and I want to do the same to them. I have to go out of my way to search them up and go to their page because I'm just not scrolling enough to come across it. And because of that, I feel so much more in my own life, and I'm not really comparing myself to what others are doing and what the new trends are. And because of that, you just have a lot of peace.
I couldn't have said that any better myself. I really couldn't have. And so now you're in this space, you're putting yourself out there. I know for a fact there are a lot of people who would love to create content the way that you're creating content, but are afraid to put themselves out there because of what other people might think or of the feedback that they're afraid they might get. One, was that ever a consideration for you, that fear of what will others think? And then two, now that you're creating content, do you ever actually receive pushback or negativity? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think fear is always going to be there because there's always fear right at the cusp of what we're unfamiliar with. And because of that, I'll tell people that if you do want to get started with this, start very small, literally go back through my videos and see where I started, and you'll notice what I'm about to tell you, which is that I started very small, dipping my, toes in the water of things that I was afraid of. I didn't like the way that I looked. I didn't have much confidence. And so I didn't want to be on camera. And so a lot of my videos at the very start were, POV, or you couldn't see my face. And it was just sort of filming my environment and not so much me. And as I got more comfortable with it, I threw like more videos of me in there, in a sense where like you still couldn't really see me. And then it got to a point where it's like, okay, now I don't care. Like any camera angle of me at all, like is fine. Like it looks good enough, like I got almost used to the way that I look because we're so used to the way that we look in a mirror, but we look different on camera because it's always flipped. And so I got so used to the way that I look that way that I was just like, oh, like I sort of look the same. Like this is okay. And from there, then I'm worried about what I sound like. And so I used other people's quotes so that I wouldn't have to do my own. And eventually I got to a point where I was comfortable speaking, not towards the camera, but I would throw clips over me speaking. And then it got to a point where I could sit down and film me looking at the camera and talking to it. And so if you go back through my videos and watch that progress, you're going to see exactly what I said. And that's how you get there, because if you do something that you're too afraid of, because you should face your fears, but if you do something you're too afraid of, you're pulling back this rubber band very, very, very far, and it's either going to break or you're going to slingshot in the opposite direction. So you want to like slowly wear that rubber band down, just like a little stretch at a time. And all of a sudden, 6 months down the road, you're an entirely different person, and things you were afraid of back then, you're not anymore. But, just to add to all that, there are, of course, things that I'm still afraid of that I'm trying to lean into so that I can just get those fears, out of there.
So I'm gonna ask a follow-up question. I'm not sure if you were expecting this, but what is one of those things that maybe you're still afraid of a little bit that you're exploring?
I'm afraid of, I think this whole new, one of the biggest things is this whole new identity as a videographer, because it happened so quickly and so unexpectedly that I wonder what people think. Do they view me this way or do they not? And how can I make them view me that way, right? Like what things can I do? And so I'm trying to find a way to be honest and authentic, because I don't want to lean into these like masks that I need to wear in order to convince people I'm a certain thing. But I'm certainly afraid that people don't see me the way that I see myself. In terms of professionalism, because I am trying to build up that client base and, build a videography business. And so that concerns me a little bit. And man, there's so many more things.
Yeah, that's a good one though. And I would imagine anybody going through any kind of transition feels some degree of what you just described. Some people might call it imposter syndrome. And that's a familiar term for many. But for me, when I stepped into this role as full-time coach, right? And now I'm coaching clients in the areas of fitness and mindset and business. And when I first took on a business client, I was really unsure of that. I was very, very, very conscious of how I thought I was being perceived. That was the thought that ran through my head more than anything else. What do other people think of this right now? And as you do more of it, just like anything else in life, you become a little bit more comfortable. You wear down that rubber band bit by bit. And it sounds like even though this is a fear of yours, it's not something that in any way, shape, or form will hold you back because you've been through this process before.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the other thing I'll throw in there, just to circle back to the self image talk, for the longest time, and this is going to sound ridiculous, I didn't put myself talking on camera on Instagram stories, on YouTube, on anywhere, because I was so concerned with the way my mouth moved when I talked. And then I asked people who knew me, do you notice anything weird about how my mouth moves? And they were like, no, like I've never looked at your mouth while you've talked. And I was so self conscious of that for so long that it just stopped me. And I remember the first time I ever talked on Instagram stories, I was studying for my board exam for physical therapy at a coffee shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was snowing outside, and I took a study break. I went outside. There was this brick wall that I used as the background. I held up my phone, the back facing camera, or the front facing camera, whichever one. I'm looking at myself in the camera and I'm talking and hey guys, and then I'd stop. Hey everyone, and then I'd stop. And I must have done that 30 times and then I just gave up and I went back inside. And then the next day I put a video up. And the next day I put a video up. And the next week I put a video up every day. And then I got used to it to the point where like I just didn't care anymore. It didn't matter to me. And yeah, so if anybody is watching any of my videos, let me know if my mouth looks weird. But other than that, is there anything else you'd like to add on onto this conversation before we move on, Brandon?
I think the best thing that I can say is that you are going to catch up to who you want to be. Like you can be anybody in terms of self image, like whether you want to change the way you dress, whether you want to change the way you speak, it's going to feel super weird when you first do it. And you're going to look in the mirror and be like, who am I? But you get really used to it. And then you look back and you feel like looking at your old self, that's the stranger now and not who you are now. So I've been doing that as much as I can. I think changing your physical environment as much as you can helps a lot with making that process faster. Like I literally cut my hair, I changed up my style a bit. I like moved my stuff around in my office and in my room. Like silly little things like that make you feel like the past is a lot further behind you than it really is. And that gives you a much better opportunity to move into the future at a faster pace.
That's really good. That's really, really good. I hope people either absorb that on the first go around or rewind this about 60 seconds and listen to that again. That's great. Speaking of environment, what is the neon sign behind you?
So that was my fitness coaching logo there. It was a B for busy body fitness. So I have the lightning bolt in there too.
That's pretty cool. So what will happen to that logo hanging up in this room of your house once you transition fully to videography?
I think it's just going to collect dust, and that's it. I've sort of accepted that fact. But I realized in the past that, from leaving engineering and moving into freelance and stuff, that the quicker I can leave these things behind and not get too attached to them, the quicker I walk down that path and find the thing that's, maybe much more exciting or much more aligned with who I want to be.
Yeah. And I just think that concept of not being attached to titles is really important, and putting your identity in the things that you can fully control, like your effort, your attitude, the way that you attack whatever it is that you're pursuing is really important because it allows you to pivot because you're not anchored to this title or this career or this thing. You are you, and you can freely move in whatever direction you want. And I think that's important. So, with that being said, we talked about the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle. What is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose, and why have you done that thing?
I think just in general, but I'll get into a few examples. But in general, it was exactly what you said, which is leaving behind those titles and leaving behind those identities that we've built up, especially when there's so many years of work behind those identities, so many friends behind them, friendships, relationships. You are risking losing those when you throw that identity out the window. But believe me when I say it's for the better, right? My friend group is different now. I'm in different relationships. I have many different opportunities around me. It was very hard to let go of that though, because I spent so much time with that and with your friends and relationships and family, like you do have a potential where shaking things up sort of upsets people and sometimes you lose them. But the thing is, you don't want to necessarily have a negative view on that if that happens, because I still appreciate all the memories I have with my old friends, but we don't align in the same way that we used to now. And so I think that was the hardest thing, was leaving behind the past. And I think I've thought long and hard about all the reasons why that was so hard, because whenever something is extremely hard for me, I want to dig deep and to realize like what fear is there, or what, it's almost always a fear. And what I'm really afraid of in leaving behind the past is realizing that time is moving extremely fast, right? Because if our day to day is very much similar, then we don't have to accept the fact that we're 5 or 6 or 7 years older. But the more that we change and we make these drastic changes in our lives, we realize that time is moving, and maybe we didn't spend the last 5 years in the way that we wanted to. I won't say should have, because who's to judge how you should have lived those 5 years? But we look back and we realize that we maybe could have done it a little better or a little differently. And we realize just how quickly it went by, and maybe we weren't paying attention to it closely. And so I think the hardest thing for me was to leave that behind and accept that life is happening and things change.
Yeah, I know for a fact that's something that many people struggle with. It's something that I struggled with as well. Um, when this podcast episode comes out, it'll be pretty close to 10 years from when I cut alcohol out of my life. And I did that at a time when most people were finding alcohol in the beginning of college. And it was this weird season of life for me where I made all these new friends. And then after a semester, I decided I am going to essentially cut out the one thing that has been bonding me to all these new people in this new environment. And it was a really lonely place. And the handful of people that were really meant to be in my life and cared about me for me are still there. And everybody else, went on with their business and I went on with my business. And I don't regret anything or any of the experiences or times that I had before I cut alcohol out. But now that I have, I realize that I'm where I need to be. Those other people are where they need to be. And I'm happy I made the transition. And so when it comes to like the idea of losing people, I think that's a really hard thing. How do you view that now in this season as you transition more to videography and maybe a little bit away from fitness? Are you afraid of losing people? Are there people in your life who maybe you see this transition yeah, just changing the way that you relate to them?
I think this transition should be easy just because I hadn't built it up too strong. I hadn't built up that identity too strong. And I built up the entire, the fitness business and that whole chapter of my life. I was very isolated anyways, because after I did, cut out alcohol, and, after I did sort of remove myself from these like party scenes and more into things that, actually made me happy, because maybe that does make people happy. And I'm not saying that that's the answer for you, but for me, every time I did it, I didn't feel good. I didn't go to sleep feeling good, and I didn't wake up feeling good physically and mentally. And so I knew I had to remove myself from those environments, those people doing those things. And so that was rough. I'm fortunate that over the past few years, I've been so isolated that I've almost always had the opportunity to pivot very quickly. And so now I'm in a place in my life though where, most of the people around me are very supportive of what I do. They find it super interesting, and we connect in ways that are much more deeper than what's on the surface. And because of that, I really think I could pivot to almost anything, and the people around me are going to respect me, and they're people I can trust. I mean, now I still go to parties and stuff. My friends have a little house party or whatever. But those friends now, I show up there, they have non-alcoholic beer there for me. I don't even have to bring it. They're like, dude, I have something for you. And like that's the kind of respect and trust that I had dreamt of. It's because when I did first give it up, you're surrounded by people that they don't want to invite you around anymore because you're the guy that's sober at a party. But now I have friends that not only respect that, but they support it. And because of that, I'm like, man, I'm so glad that I sort of went solo, removed myself from that, because you will find people that align with what you want. So if I could give anybody advice, you might be alone for a while, but stand true by your morals because people are going to find you, the more that you actually stand up and go like, no, this is what I believe in. And when those people surround you, like life is very good. It's very peaceful. I always tell people, who like talk about my content and stuff, they wonder if I'm worried that I'm going to lose it or whatnot. And I say, man, if I lost it all at this point, I'd be upset that I couldn't reach so many people with that message anymore. But I'd be super happy just to have my family and my friends and the relationships that I have around me, go to jujitsu 4 or 5 times a week, go to the gym. Like I have everything that I really want. And because of that, I'm very patient in moving forward with all this. So I'm in a great place right now. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to hopefully give people hope that it might take a while to get there. But when you get there, that feeling of peace that you're dreaming of, where that weight isn't weighing on your shoulders, is 100% possible. You're not chasing something that doesn't exist. It is out there.
And the thing I took away from that, in addition to everything you just said, is you need to find friends that if you stop drinking, they would invite you to parties and have non-alcoholic beer ready for you. Those sound like some real friends. Um, and the other thing I'll add, and this is not always the case, but I think a lot of times when somebody in a circle is trying to better themselves in a way that is outside of the norm of that circle, sometimes that circle is not a fan because they see somebody else moving in a direction that maybe they feel like maybe they should be moving in, but they really don't want to. And so that can create distance. And that's a very real thing. And my experience 10 years ago in college, I can look back now and see that that was the case for some people. And also 10 years down the road, a lot of those people have now started to either follow my content or reach out to me and ask questions or realize like, hey, I wish I made these changes 10 years ago, but I want to go down this path now. And so, like you said, stay true to your morals, stay true to your values, stay true to your gut, and do what you know to be right for yourself. And then the people who matter will find you down the road, even if it's not right away. So, with that being said, life is a long game. And this is the Project Endure podcast. And when you hear the word endurance, what comes to mind for you, Brandon?
I think to me, endurance is the ability to move forward unchanged. And I know that when we think of self development and stuff, we do think of changing in a positive manner. And I do think that that's a great way to move forward. It's really the only way to move forward is to improve. But when I say unchanged, I mean, and this sort of leans, connects exactly with what we were just talking about. It's moving forward with those values and stuff that you have and standing by them. Because from an engineering background, when I think endurance, I think how long can a system operate in a way that's reliable? Is it losing accuracy? Are parts failing? Or are they degrading? What happens when they fail? Does the whole system catastrophically fail? Or does it just become slightly less reliable or slightly less accurate? And that's how I view moving forward in life too. It's like, how much resilience do you have to stand by what you believe in and not allow all of the external factors, whether it's what people think or, what's happening with the economy, how much are those actually degrading you? Because eventually you may have a part that fails and all of a sudden you're back to ground zero again.
Mm. A few years back, or more than a few years now, my sister graduated high school. Let's just say 6 years, ballpark. And I wrote a letter to her, which I then later published as a blog. And I titled it Change, but Stay the Same. And the whole idea was you're going to go to college, you're going to go to this new environment with new people, you're going to have new experiences. And it's great, like change, but stay the same. Meaning, you can change certain things about yourself, you can explore different paths, but don't lose who you are at your core. don't lose your values, don't lose the things that truly matter. Don't let those things change. And I love that message. I love that concept of endurance. And I think it's often lost because a lot of times when we think of endurance, and I'll speak broadly for people within the fitness community, I think our minds generally go to running or cycling or endurance sport. And it's getting from one place to another. And we don't necessarily focus on what's happening throughout that process. And we are enduring hard things. We are facing obstacles. We are embracing resistance. And in that process, there are these opportunities. There are these places where we can choose to stop, where we can choose to quit, where we can choose to give into the temptation of what's easiest, but we don't, and we finish the race. And I think the hard part about life is like, there really is no finish line that we can see, right? It's not like when I get here, I've made it and I'm done. Yes, we all have a finish line and life ends at some point here on earth. But I think it's harder in that respect because we don't know when, we don't know where, we don't know how. And so when you look at your life in terms of endurance, is there an end goal that you're aiming for? Or is it truly just step by step, one day at a time? Your goal is to endure.
I think really for me, it just is one step at a time. I think I've found the most peace in just asking myself, how far can I go? It's not really where am I going to end up? It's just how far I can go. And sometimes I'm going to take a turn because maybe the path I'm on is sort of boring me a little bit. Maybe it's not the right path for me anymore as I grow as a person. But regardless, I just want to keep moving forward. And, whatever direction I take, I'm interested in seeing what's up the path. Maybe there's no final destination, but I want to see every view that I can along the way.
Man, mic drop. That's great. With that being said, let's transition to this final question. And this is one that again is really important to me because, like we've talked about, there are people listening to this who are in all different places of life, all different seasons, all different chapters. And some of the people listening are just going through a tough time. Maybe they are battling mental health. Maybe they are struggling with a potential career change. Maybe they're just having a hard week or a hard day and they're not sure what to do next. And you have this opportunity to speak directly to these people. You're in their ears. What would you like to say to them?
I would like to say that you need to be extremely honest with where you are because life is about taking the next step forward. And when we lie to ourselves about where we are, whether that's how we're feeling or where we are professionally or financially, whatever struggle or goal that you're setting, when we lie to ourselves about where we are, we're trying to take the next step, but we're taking the step that's 5, 6, 7, 8 steps down the line. And we're wondering why we can't take that step, right? You can imagine trying to climb a set of stairs and you're trying to climb up to the eighth step forward. And you're like, I can't do it. Oh my God, it must be me. And it's like the moment you become honest with yourself and say, this is actually where I am, you can take that first little step. And the longer you lie to yourself about where you are, because that's the biggest thing. We often lie to the world about where we are, but the more we do that, the more we convince ourselves, we lie to ourselves about where we are. And when you get there, you will get stuck there. And that's why I was stuck in my battle with mental health for so long. It's why it took me so long to transition from engineering into freelance and into videography and content creation. It's because I just wasn't honest with myself. And don't be afraid for that honest position to be extremely embarrassing at times. It's going to be embarrassing. The first step can sometimes be embarrassingly small, and it can be something that you'd be ashamed to say out loud. But if that's where you are, man, that's where I was. So, don't sweat it. And I think a lot of people are there too. They're just making it seem like they're not, but they're going to get stuck if they're doing that. So be honest with where you are. Take the first step, even if it is embarrassingly small. In fact, I would look for an embarrassingly small step to take because more times than not, that's probably what the next step is. So if you do that, you're going to be in a much better place 6 months down the road.
That's nobody's ever said anything like that for that final question. And I really appreciate that because it's so true and honest and powerful. I have a quote that I'll throw in here. It's from Eric Greitens, who said, "We all have battles to fight. And it's often in those battles that we are most alive. It's on the front lines of our lives that we earn wisdom, create joy, forge friendships, discover happiness, find love, and do purposeful work." And to your point, Brandon, sometimes that purposeful work is simply turning toward the battle and being honest of where we need to start, where we are right now, and that small step forward. And as hard as that can be, I can say from personal experience, and it sounds like you can from the same, that sometimes that small first step is exactly what needs to happen to move forward. And the longer we ignore that, the longer we're going to feel stuck where we are. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I want to point people toward your content. I obviously have said I love it. I think it's really powerful. I think there's a lot of value for anybody to consume your content. With that being said, in your Instagram bio, it says with a heart next to it, my DMs are and always will be, in parentheses, open. And I really appreciate that. And when I reached out, you responded. And I would imagine you do the same for anybody else. And I know how exhausting that can be. I'm speaking from personal experience, but I also know how important it is. And so if somebody is listening to this, something you said clicked with them, they want to just check out your content, see your mustache, whatever it is, where should they find you?
So on Instagram or TikTok, it's Brandon underscore Farewell. And yeah, you can message me anytime, especially on Instagram. That's probably the easiest place to reach me. There are going to be other channels soon, potentially YouTube, hint, hint, but not yet.
Awesome. Well, I will leave links down in the description for anybody who wants to check anything out. And I'm sure down the road, if, hint, hint, YouTube is something that you expand into, people will be able to find that through your socials. So, Brandon, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. This was a powerful conversation, and I'm just excited for a friendship to grow out of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Same to you, man. We'll stay connected and hopefully do more of this in the future.
Sounds like a plan to me. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.